Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, Senator Murray, as well. I also have been listening to a lot of our colleagues around the table. I actually think there are some agreements and obviously some major challenges of disagreement. I've got 3 touchstones that I hope will come out of this effort. First, let's try to agree to do no harm, which would mean, and I think we've heard this from lots of folks, that another government shutdown or threatening the full faith and credit of the United States of America does no good at all and presents an enormous economic crisis. I think, again, that we all will have our numbers on what the price was, but it was unnecessary, unprecedented. We all have our fun factoids about the shutdown. Mine is the fact that during the shutdown, we actually furloughed 3 American Nobel Prize winners in physics. You kind of wonder, what do the folks in China, India, Russia, around the rest of the world think when we were furloughing those kind of American assets? And I can assure you those countries did not put their research on hold during our period of dysfunction. Second, and I think we've heard a lot of commonality on this, let's remember that sequestration was supposed to be set up to be so bad that no rational group of people would let it happen. And I think there is a way that we can protect the savings but find ways to replace it. I know some of my colleagues may think that, well, it's not really been that bad. I actually believe, similar to Senator Whitehouse's comments, that it's almost like a cancer inside. I can tell you perhaps Virginia, Senator Kane may mention this as well, we're a little bit of ground zero, particularly because of our combinations with the military. What we are doing in terms of hurting military readiness, what we are doing in terms of costing taxpayers money because we're not able to do the long-term purchase contracts that DOD has operated in the past is totally irresponsible. I know a lot of us around this table like to cite, business experience. I'm still proud of the fact that I was a business guy longer than I've been on the political side, and my time in business was mostly spent as an investor. And if you're looking at investing on any business plan, you really look at 3 things. You look at a company's plan for their workforce, a company's plan for investment in plant and equipment, and a company's plan on how they're going to stay ahead of the competition. Countries have a business plan too. We call it our budget. We have those 3 items as well. Workforce is education and training, plant and equipment's infrastructure, and staying ahead of the competition is research and development. And while I strongly believe most of our job growth is going to come from the private sector, the government does provide a framework in those 3 areas to allow the private sector to prosper. And unfortunately, if we go forward with approaches that indiscriminately cut those areas of investment in infrastructure, education, and R&D, we're not going to have a business plan that long-term, I think, will allow our country to prosper. So let's find a way that we can find that common agreement to replace sequester and make some investments in those key areas. Third, and this is, I know, maybe a little bit off script, I actually hope that we might be able to exceed expectations. I think we've done an appropriate job of lowering expectations so that the simply avoiding crisis may be viewed as a success. But I think while we may not be able to get to the so-called grand bargains, that we ought to have used this opportunity to recognize that if we keep coming back to the discretionary bucket, whether it's on the defense side or the non-defense side, that it becomes a zero-sum game after a period. And I would say, as somebody who acknowledges we need to look at entitlements, when we hear these constant references to 50-year revenue totals, I just think it refuses to recognize some of the fundamental changes in where our economy is right now. We've seen, I'll just cite 2, a dramatic transfer from the private sector to the public sector of research and development expenses, not just in America, but it's all across the world. There is no such thing as a Bell Labs anymore. And increasingly, if we're going to stay competitive, the public sector is going to pick up R&D. And because we've been blessed with a much longer lifetime ability, the entitlement cost, even with entitlement reforms, are going to be greater than we've seen in the past because of 80-plus year living expectations. So I hope and pray that we actually are willing. We all kind of know what we're going to have to deal with. Democrats are going to have to deal with entitlement reforms. Republicans are going to have to deal with revenues. And we ought to be willing to at least approach those areas. I would close with simply saying we all have lots of ideas about how we can grow our economy. I think there would be nothing that would do more for job creation and economic growth than removing this fiscal overhang of governing by crisis. And I hope that we could do that and exceed those expectations.
Thank you,
Mr.
Senator
Chairman.
Warner.